Hey guys, it's Graham. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be telling you guys the 4 things that no one told me about being an au pair before I became one. Before I get too far into this video, if you haven't already, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment down below letting me know what you think. I do read each and every single comment, and I appreciate them very, very much. That being said, let's jump right into this video. So in this video, I'm gonna be telling you guys 4 things that no one told me about becoming an au pair. No one warned me about these things, and 1 is positive, 2 are negative, and the last one is kind of like a weird mix, but you absolutely do need to listen to all 4 because I promise you nobody else is going to tell you what I'm about to tell you. If you're considering being an au pair, or if you're already an au pair, this is useful stuff to know because like I said, no one's gonna tell you this. And I had to learn this the hard way. I had to learn this experientially. And so having somebody come in and give me these tips beforehand, I think would have completely changed my first 2 au pair experiences and probably had something to do with my 3rd one here. So these are really useful tips that I'm gonna be giving you, and I hope that they do something for you. Also, I would just like to note, I am home alone. Listen to this. It's quiet. It's so quiet. Nobody's at home, no kids, no host parents, no maid, nobody. And well, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because I'm going to kind of talk about this. Before I jump into the first point, I'm going to plug my Instagram. I will put that right down here so you guys can see it. Be sure to go and follow me and send me a DM. That is the best way that I get to talk on a day-to-day basis with au pairs, and I do frequently check it. I'm frequently on it, so please get in touch with me that way. All right, so getting that intro out of the way, let's jump right into the first point. Business on top, play on bottom. All right, so getting that intro out of the way, I do want to talk about the first point here, the first thing that no one told me about being an au pair, and that is you're paid practical pennies. So to be fair here, I was told about this, okay? It's not like I had no idea that I wasn't gonna get paid much. It was obviously in my contract. I had read it online. I had heard other au pairs talk about this, but I think it just never really registered with me until I got to my host country. Now, if you're not familiar, most au pairs are paid somewhere between 70 and 120 euros a week, normally depending on the family you're with and what country you're in. As Spain and Italy, the cheaper countries tend to pay you less, and the more expensive countries like France, Austria do tend to pay you more. Nonetheless, it's still not much. Like if you're making 120 euros a week, it's still not a lot of money for the amount of time that you work. And like I said, I obviously did know about this, so it's not fair for me to say that nobody had told me this, but after I kind of got in the groove that first go round and I started working, and I worked so hard. I mean, I worked so hard. And I remember the first week my host mom pays me, it's a Sunday, she comes up to me, she hands me the money, and I was like, this is it? You know, it's like a 50 euro bill and a 20 euro bill. You know, that's all I'm getting for all of this work that I've done. And of course, I know that sounds greedy or selfish, but you do work a lot. Like you work really hard, and coming from the US where nannies get paid somewhere around like $10 to $20 an hour, depending on where you are, it's so little. And obviously, it's something that I've gotten over. Like, I have come to accept it. I love being an au pair. I've come back to do it twice since then. So it is something that I've come to terms with, but nonetheless, it was definitely like a splash of cold water when I was first paid that 70 euro pocket money salary. One thing that I do suggest you do that I did not do is make sure that you know how expensive your host city is. Thankfully, Madrid is not expensive at all. So for me, 70 euros really did go a long way. But I've heard of friends in more expensive cities like Berlin and Paris tell me that their 100 euros is nothing in cities like that. So be sure you do know about how expensive your host city is, because knowing how expensive your host country / host city is will help you brace for the fact that you're not gonna make much money. All right, so moving right along to the second thing no one told me before becoming an au pair, and that is you fall in love with your host family. So this is the positive point that I've decided to throw in here because no one told me this and I really didn't expect it. But you really do fall in love with your host family while you're an au pair. Now granted, a lot of this does depend on the host family. Some host families are going to be very loving, very caring, very generous. Some are not, as evidenced in my second experience. But I think when you're living with a family, when you are taking care of their most prized possession, their children, it's practically impossible to not fall in love with these people because you have to build this bond in order for the relationship to work. I really don't know what I expected. Like, I didn't think about it that much. I think that I was just expecting to go to Spain, spend my summer there, and then move back home and forget about it. You know, just move on with my life and have that as my summer abroad. But that's not at all what happened. I mean, when I got there, pretty much from day one, I just fell in love with my host family and these people treated me so well. I was a total stranger in their country. They could have really taken advantage of me, but they didn't. You know, they treated me exceptionally well. They were so kind to me. They were always helping me out, guiding me along as I learned Spain, as I learned the language and the culture. And as a result, I think my host family, my host kids, and I just fell in love with each other. And we've created this incredible bond that will last a lifetime. And another thing I have to say about this is it happens really fast. Like my first host family, I think within the first 2 weeks or so, we were just like matches, you know, like we were really starting to, the parents and I, enjoy each other's company. And then also the kids and I were developing this beautiful relationship that I still enjoy to this day. And that's something that I don't think you can get through many other experiences. And one of the craziest things about this is every day you grow a little bit closer to your host kids and your host parents. I mean, it's this weird thing that I can't really explain, but every day that you're with them, at the end of the day, you're like, I know these people a little bit more. You know, you understand them a bit more, you understand how they function, and they do the same for you. And it makes this beautiful relationship that I think you can hold on to for a lifetime. My first host family and I have been talking about them this whole video. We really have this beautiful bond. And I did ultimately spend almost 4 months with them if you include my first time and then my second time in Spain as well. And so I think that is why we have such an affinity, and we did go through a lot together. If you've seen my au pair horror story, you've heard me say that my first host family, they just swooped in. Like when I was at my most vulnerable and just in so much pain, they came, they let me stay with them, and it was never even a question. You know, it was never, can I stay with you? My host mom out of the gate said, you're staying with us, you know? So it was just that incredible bond that we had that allowed us to continue to grow. And I guarantee you, it's a relationship that I will keep up until the day I die. I mean, it was such a special thing for me, and it still is. And it's something that I had no idea that I was gonna be getting into. When I left Spain for the first time, after my 2 months, I was a mess. The day that I left, my flight left out at like 11, so I actually got up before the kids did. I didn't see them that day, which is good because I was crying like a baby. When we were on the plane going back to Atlanta, I was sitting in that seat where the flight attendant like faces you, and as we're taking off, I mean, I'm like ugly crying in my chair, like my head is in my hands bawling, and the flight attendant leans forward and she touches me on the knee and she's like, oh, it's okay, honey, I've flown with this pilot a lot of times, he's really great. And of course she thought that I was like scared, but I was just so devastated to leave. You know, I had built this incredible bond with these people, and I was crushed. I was really crushed to be leaving. Thankfully, I did get to go back and live with them more later, but it was just so painful for me to leave after that 2 months. And then later that day, when I did get home, I walked through like the security area. My parents were there, and I go and I hug my mom, and I was crying again. The first thing I said to my mom was, I miss my kids. And I was like crying. And later on, she was like, Graham, like, I hadn't seen you in 2 months and you said, I miss my kids. But really, that was what was going through my mind because I had built such a beautiful bond with these people. So I assure you, if you do get the right family, you will build an incredible relationship with them that will last a lifetime. Alright, so the third thing that no one told me about becoming an au pair was you never really stop working. You guys have probably heard me skirt around this topic in my other videos, but one of the most difficult things that I wasn't aware of before I started au pairing was as a live-in au pair, you really don't stop working. You're always on call. you are always to some extent working. Of course, this point does mostly apply to live-in au pairs, so if you're live out, it's not gonna be that big of a deal for you because you obviously stop working when you go home. But for me, as a live-in au pair, and for the majority of live-in au pairs, living where you work means that there's a really fine line between working and not working, and a lot of the time that line becomes very blurry. I've made a whole nother series of videos about being a live-in au pair, and I do highly endorse being a live-in au pair. I think it's a great experience, but nonetheless, it does put you in a situation to where you're working quite a lot and it's hard to say no. Being live-in means that you experience life with your family, and life can just be crazy sometimes. An example of this, earlier this week, my host mom was sick. She just got sick all of a sudden. She's never sick, and I had to do a little bit more than I would normally do, like taking the kids to school in the mornings, getting up, getting them ready, that kind of thing. And it was not something that I minded doing, okay? I did not mind it at all. My host family is so good to me, so it's my duty to be good back to them. It did mean that I had to work a little bit extra, even if I didn't mind working. It's different than a 9-to-5 job because, like, with a 9-to-5, you go, you clock in. If you clock in at 9, you're not working until 9, you know, sometimes even later. And even when I was a nanny, I had to be there at 8 o'clock. I wasn't working at 7:45. Or when I left, I was supposed to leave at 3. I wasn't working at 3:15. It was 8 to 3. Every day, consistent. Whereas being an au pair, the lines are a bit blurred, being that you live with a family. Another example of this, just this morning, I was editing a video. Clara, my youngest host child, came into my room and she wanted to play with me. And she was not taking no for an answer. So it's fine, you know, I always want my host kids to feel comfortable coming to me and asking me questions. And it was one of those things where I did start playing with her and we had fun, it was good. But nonetheless, living with them made that a bit more difficult than if you're living elsewhere, or if you're not an au pair at all, you wouldn't have that issue. And like I said, I don't mind, it was fun, it was really sweet. And I do love that aspect about being an au pair, but it is something you should consider before you become an au pair. As a side note, I do think this is a positive too, because it means that you experience a lot of the family, because you get to be a family member and you get to experience a lot of the culture as well. But nonetheless, it does have a negative aspect to it, and it's something you should be aware of before you become an au pair. Had I known this, I definitely still would have become an au pair, but it does change things a bit, just knowing that you're never really not working. Okay, so I obviously have worked my way back to my bedroom for this last point. I think the host family is gonna be home any minute now, so I'm really pushing it. But the last thing that no one told me about being an au pair before I became an au pair is you don't have a defined role in the family. And I know what you're thinking. You have a contract, duh. And your contract does tell you what you're supposed to do. It informs you of a lot of your duties, but that doesn't change the fact that as an au pair, you're in this weird gray area where you don't really know your place in the family. The good news here is this is not a permanent thing. It's not forever that you don't know your place in the family. Eventually you do figure it out, but of course, depending on the family, depending on your actual role, it can be difficult to find out where you're supposed to be in the family. You know, what your role is, not just as a worker, but as a temporary family member. This does kind of play into the last point in the sense that you never stop working. And as an au pair, you're this weird mixture of employee, family member, exchange student, and finding that perfect balance of all of your different roles is a really difficult thing to do. And unfortunately, I think some au pairs never really get into the groove with their host family. With my first host family, I would say it took me about 2 months before I really started feeling comfortable and really understood my place in the house. And with my current host family, I feel like I'm just now getting to that point as well. So I do think around month 2, you start to figure stuff like that out. But nonetheless, it does take time, and it is a difficult thing to figure out what your role is. As an au pair, you're not a family member, but you're also not a stranger. You know, you're somewhere kind of in the middle. For the children, you're not a parent. Like, you don't have that same authority as their parents do, but you're also not one of their peers. So it can be really difficult to differentiate yourself from the family and figure out exactly where you're supposed to be. One of the most common complaints I hear from au pairs is that they don't feel like they're comfortable in the family, or they don't know what their role is in the house. And unfortunately, that is a common problem that au pairs have to work through, and it's something that I think all of us face at some point or another. An example of this, just in my host family, I have quite the age range of host kids, being the youngest 6, and then 8, 11, and 13. So it can be really difficult for me to figure out what level of authority I use for each child. A good example of this, just last week, the kids had a physical activity after school, like a little side thing that they do as a hobby. And when we came back in, they were hot, they were sweaty, you know, it's always hot here in Seville. So I told my younger two, I was like, all right, you guys go and take a bath. So off they went, you know, taking a bath or whatever. Well, my oldest one, I didn't really know what to tell him. You know, he's like 13 years old. Do I tell him he has to take a bath? Do I let him figure that out on his own? And eventually he did go and take a shower. But nonetheless, it was one of those things like, you know, what am I supposed to do for this person that's only 6 years younger than I am? Also, on a little rabbit trail on this one, so being that my oldest one is 13, it's also really cool because he's really mature as well. I mean, he's equally as mature as most like 16-year-olds. Because he's almost more like a friend to me. You know, like he'll come into my room at night and we'll chat about politics or just different things like that. And that is really cool. But nonetheless, that makes it even harder for the dynamic of me being the authoritarian figure in the house because he is older. Now, like I did say in the beginning of this point, eventually you will find your place. You know, you'll figure out where you're supposed to be if you look hard enough. And I am starting to get there now, but it is something that takes time, and it's something that, I don't know, I mean, it's just a bit awkward to try to get yourself into that position where you do know where you're supposed to be. The last thing I'll say is when you are trying to figure out what your place is in the house, you're gonna do some awkward things. I mean, you're gonna have some moments where you feel a bit uncomfortable because you might have overstepped or understepped. So I do encourage you to go out and just try. You know, just try your best for the family. Do what you think is right, and I'm confident if they're a good family, they will help you get into that groove and find your place in their house. Okay guys, so that wraps up the 4 things that no one told me about being an au pair before I became an au pair myself. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you've had, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment down below. I really do appreciate you guys' support. Wow, I mean, it has blown me away recently. The channel is growing like nobody's business. So thank you guys so much. Muchas gracias por ver este video y hasta luego. Ciao.